Wendy Aughe was a 28-year-old single mother of 2 children living in Bellingham, Washington. She was a student at the McDonald's Beauty School. On April 24, 1987, Wendy went for lunch across the street at La Paloma Restaurant. When she returned, she told her classmates that she'd met a man dressed in a 3-piece suit and was planning on going on a date with him that night. Wendy told her classmates this man's name was Mike Johnson. At around 4:30 p.m., Wendy met with her date, again at La Paloma Restaurant. While out, Wendy ran into a friend and introduced them to Mike. Afterward, Wendy and Mike gave the friend a ride back to Burlington before meeting up with another friend of Wendy's in Bellingham. Wendy and Mike stayed at the home of her friend in Bellingham until approximately 1 a.m. on the 25th of April. This was the last known sighting of Wendy before she went missing. On April 28, 1987, Wendy's daughter's babysitter reported the mother missing after she failed to pick up her 8-year-old daughter. Wendy was supposed to pick up her daughter on the 26th of April, however, she never arrived. The babysitter visited Wendy's home, but no one answered the door. Upon visiting Wendy's residence, responding police discovered 2 pools of drying blood near the head of her bed. They also saw blood spatters on the bed's headboard and under the pillow. Additionally, there were stains on the bedsheet, which was later determined to be a biological specimen from a male. Prior to her disappearance, Wendy was dressed in brown boots, gray corduroy pants, and a Levi's jean jacket. Those same clothes were now discovered inside out between the bed and the wall at Wendy's apartment. Police later found out that approximately 6 hours after Wendy's last sighting, her date, Mike Johnson, was spotted at the Lighthouse Mission homeless shelter in Bellingham, where he had been residing. Earlier, Johnson had borrowed parts of a 3-piece suit from one of the workers there and had pretended to be well off in order to get a date with Wendy. At the time, Mike claimed to have spent the night with the woman and said that he was planning on moving in with her. Mike later drove Wendy's 1972 Ford Torino to La Paloma Restaurant, where he was starting his second day of work. He then stole all of the money in the restaurant's till and a bottle of Jack Daniels from the bar shelf and disappeared. The day after the ill-fated date, on April 26th, Wendy's vehicle was recorded crossing the United States-Canadian border at Oroville, Washington border crossing. On April 27th, the same vehicle was discovered abandoned in Eugene, Oregon. Police found a Burger King hamburger box left inside of the vehicle and were able to lift fingerprints from it. They matched a man named Darren D. O'Neill. Police would discover a job application completed by Mike Johnson at La Paloma Restaurant, which had fingerprints matching those of Darren D. O'Neill. And based on witness description, police were able to determine that Darren used Mike Johnson as an alias. In the trunk of Wendy's car, police found a suit jacket, a tie, and a pair of men's Levi's slacks. According to a worker at the Lighthouse Mission shelter, these clothing items matched those of the 3-piece suit that was loaned to a man known as Mike Johnson. The police also observed a tiny red dot, which may have been blood, on the front left pocket of the slacks. Darren was later arrested for the murder of another young woman named Robin P. Smith. In February of 1989, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and robbery in Smith's case and was sentenced to life in prison. In 1990, he was sentenced to 135 years in prison for an unrelated kidnapping and assault of a 14-year-old girl. He's also suspected in several other violent crimes across the United States. He was found guilty of auto theft in Wendy's case. However, while he was suspected in the disappearance, due to lack of evidence, he was never charged. Wendy's body was never found, and the case would grow cold. Decades later, in 2015, with advancements in DNA technology, Washington State Patrol Crime Lab reached out to Bellingham Police Department and tested DNA found at the crime scene against Darren's. It was soon confirmed that the biologic stain found on Wendy's bedsheet did belong to Darren D. O'Neill. In 2020, Bellingham Police Department received another report, which confirmed that the blood on the front left pocket of the pair of men's slacks found in the trunk of Wendy's stolen car matched that of Wendy. In 2021, cheek swabs were taken from Darren D. O'Neill in order to match them against the DNA found at the crime scene. In early March of 2023, Darren D. O'Neill was extradited to Washington State and charged with the second-degree murder of Wendy Aughe. Darren D. O'Neill is currently serving time for previous murders, but is eligible for parole in May of 2033. His next court appearance is scheduled for April 5th, 2023, for the murder of Wendy Aughe. Kyle Clinkscales was a 22-year-old junior at Auburn University in Alabama. His parents lived in LaGrange, Georgia, and Kyle worked as a bartender at the Moose Club in LaGrange. He would travel about 35 miles from Auburn University to LaGrange 2 nights a week for his job. On January 27, 1976, Kyle left the Moose Club in his 1974 Ford Pinto runabout at around 11 p.m., intending to drive back to Auburn University for the night. However, he never arrived. Kyle's parents, John and Louise, became worried when they did not hear from their son the following Sunday. Kyle would always call them on the weekends. His parents then went to his apartment in Auburn and learned from his roommate that he had not returned to his apartment since Tuesday. His parents immediately reported him missing to both the police in Auburn and LaGrange. Investigators were not sure if Kyle had left of his own accord or if foul play was involved. Kyle had been struggling academically at the university and had dropped out of another school prior to enrolling into Auburn. His parents believed that he would return. However, he never did. There was nothing unusual discovered at Kyle Clinkscales' apartment, which would have indicated he had run away. Kyle had only $50 with him at the time of his disappearance, and his ATM card had not been used since he went missing. Kyle's parents followed any and every lead to find their son. As Kyle liked New Orleans, his parents posted advertisements and distributed flyers within the city. Additionally, Kyle had enjoyed his trip to Hawaii as a child, so John and Louise sent letters to every police department in the state in hopes of finding any information about their son's whereabouts. As time went on, however, family, friends, and the police became increasingly suspicious that foul play might be involved. In 1981, a man named Danny Moore came forward and claimed he was Kyle. He claimed to have suffered from amnesia after a car accident in 1976. John and Louise thought that a letter he wrote matched Kyle's handwriting, but later, dental records proved that he was not Kyle. On May 27, 1987, a man who was out walking his dogs near Flat Shoal Creek, south of LaGrange, found Kyle's Exxon credit card. The card had expired in 1973, 3 years prior to Kyle's disappearance. His parents said Kyle's wallet had been stolen in 1973 and that it was possible the thief disposed of the credit card in that area, and that it was not actually related to Kyle's 1976 disappearance. The case would reach national headlines, but no significant leads were found. Kyle's parents were desperate and consulted several psychics. One of the psychics told them that Kyle had actually been kidnapped, his car repainted, and his body buried in Texas. His parents went to Texas in search for their son, but nothing came of it. In 1991, police started a 24-hour dig around Troup County after receiving a tip that Kyle might be buried there. However, nothing would be found. The investigation had stalled due to lack of leads, but finally, in 2005, Kyle's parents went to detectives after a mysterious caller told them that he had reason to believe their son was murdered and his body dumped. The witness who came forward claimed that when he was only 7 years old, he had seen a man named Ray Hyde disposing of Kyle's body. Hyde was a member of the Moose Club, and police believe that he and Kyle may have met through the association. They wondered if Kyle was murdered because he had found out about Hyde's prior criminal activities. Ray Hyde had been questioned by police in 1996 regarding Kyle's disappearance. However, he had denied any involvement. The man told them that Hyde had been the one to actually kill Kyle, for what purpose he did not know, and that one of his relatives was involved in putting his remains into a 55-gallon drum. The witness says he believes they disposed of the barrel in a nearby lake. The witness then drew where his 7-year-old self recalled the location of either the disposed body or Kyle's car. A search warrant was created based on this information, and a junkyard, which was owned by Hyde, and a lake was searched by police, but nothing came of it. Ray Hyde passed away in 2001 and therefore was unable to be interviewed further. Based on this new information, police arrested 63-year-old Jimmy Earl Jones and Janine Pollock Johnson in 2005. Both were charged with concealing a death, false statements, and obstructing justice. Witnesses placed Jeanne at Hyde's residence on the night of Kyle's disappearance. However, she denied it. The outcome of her case has not been publicized. Jimmy, on the other hand, initially claimed that on the night Kyle disappeared, he had arrived at Hyde's residence and found his body. He said Kyle appeared to have been shot, and that he then helped Hyde drag the body into his shop. He claimed that Kyle's body was covered with concrete, placed in a barrel, and disposed of in a private pond. This correlated with the witness statement. Jones said that Hyde later disclosed to him that he had taken the body from the pond and had transported it to an undisclosed location. However, Jones subsequently made many statements to authorities that contradicted this earlier account. The prosecution stated that because Jones had made so many contradictory statements, his testimony should be characterized as, quote, absolutely useless. He ultimately pleaded guilty to making false statements to police and was given a 9-year prison sentence, of which he served 7. On December 7, 2021, police were notified of a submerged car in a creek off of County Road 83 in Caseta, Alabama. The car was taken out of the creek and police found human remains inside. They also found credit cards as well as a wallet. Based on the car's license plate, police believed the remains belonged to Kyle Clinkscale. 1 year later, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's crime lab was able to positively identify the human remains as belonging to Kyle Clinkscales. His cause of death has not yet been determined or revealed. It is unclear if Kyle simply ran off the road or if foul play was actually involved. Unfortunately, Kyle's parents died without knowing what happened to their son. Kyle's father passed away in 2007, while Kyle's mother passed away in January of 2021, just 11 months prior to Kyle's remains being found. Carol Sue Klaber was 16 years old and attending Dixie Heights High School. She was known for being social and outgoing and loved riding her bike around the neighborhood. On June 4, 1976, Carol went on a bike ride in Devu Park. Witnesses at the park saw Carol talking to a man who was described as around 5 foot 10 inches tall, with sandy blonde hair and slender build. While witnesses were unable to give the exact age of the man, they did specify that he was older than the 16-year-old teen with whom he was speaking. Carol then left the park with the man in his car, described by witnesses as a Chevrolet Monte Carlo or a Pontiac Grand Prix. She put her bike into the car's trunk, and both man and teenager drove away. She was later spotted taking her bike out of the car and bringing it into her house. She then came back out and again got inside the older man's car. They both drove away. This would be the last time Carol was seen alive. The following day, a dentist found Carol Sue's body in a ditch at around 8:30 in the morning. The dentist immediately notified the police. An autopsy revealed that Carol had been intimately assaulted, strangled, and beaten with a tire iron. The killer's DNA was found at the crime scene, located on Chambers Road in Walton. It was taken and preserved for future testing. Due to the sparse amount of evidence found at the crime scene and the lack of DNA technology existent in 1974, the case would grow cold. In 2017, Boone County Sheriff's Office cold case detectives Coy Cox and Tim Adams re-examined the case and contacted the original detective on file, Jerry Keith. Keith had identified 2 possible persons of interest in the case. One of the suspects had stolen a vehicle matching the description of the Chevrolet Monte Carlo or Pontiac Grand Prix. Cox and Adams interviewed the man, but he denied any involvement in Carol's case. Cooperating fully with detectives, he was quite candid in saying, quote, "I've done a lot of things. I'm not going to deny that, but I did not kill Carol Sue Klaber." The cold case investigators then looked into their only other suspect, Michael Dean Tate. He was a suspect in a case where he had intimately assaulted a woman. Tate had lived in Georgia and traveled to the area for work frequently in the 1970s and 1980s. While Tate confessed to the previous assault, he denied murdering Carol. Detectives took his DNA sample and tested it against the DNA found at the crime scene. However, it did not match. Detectives were back to square one. With both possible suspects eliminated, they had no further leads with which to go forward. In 2022, detectives contacted genetic genealogy company Ortham Labs. Season of Justice provided funding for the forensic testing, and DNA was sent to the lab in hopes that forensic-grade genome sequencing technology could profile the previously unidentified suspect. Ortham scientists constructed a detailed DNA profile from the sample left almost 50 years prior. Soon, they were able to identify Thomas W. Dunaway as the killer. At the time of the murder, Thomas Dunaway was 19 years old and lived not far from Carol. Apart from the DNA evidence, there were also records indicating that Dunaway possessed a 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, which closely matched the description given by witnesses at Devu Park. Detectives learned that Dunaway had enlisted in the Army just 9 days after Carol's murder. He would go on to murder a man named Ronnie Townsend just 6 months later, in December of 1976. He was listed as AWOL from the military at the time. He was sentenced to life in prison for Townsend's murder, but was released after only 7 years for unexplained reasons. Dunaway died in 1990. The sheriff's office requested that Dunaway be indicted posthumously, but prosecutors declined the request, citing a lack of resources. However, prosecutors did say they would seek charges against Dunaway had he still been alive. Detectives have obtained a court order to exhume Dunaway's body in order to get a DNA sample and enter it into CODIS to see if he's linked to other crimes. Nearly 50 years later, the case was finally closed. In these uncertain times, a special thanks to all of our patrons for their continued support. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Merc07 or just search Patreon Merc.